Yesterday, we watched a video out of sequence. I said that we were going to follow the Canvas schedule and hold on one sec, let me share. All right, so I said we're going to follow Canvas schedule and do plants as foods and then animals as food. Um, and in the AP classroom, those are the units that I opened, the plants as food. So um, don't disregard the meat production one that we watched. We'll just talk about it later. I don't think I opened that one in the AP classroom. So we're going to watch Green Revolution today. And then all of these are open in the AP classroom. So 3, 4, 5, 6, those are all open. So we're going to watch Green Revolution today. And again, I apologize that I skipped right over it and did meat production yesterday. So with that being said, we got almost everybody here, not really missing anybody. We will look at the Green Revolution. And actually, there is no FRQs questions in the AP classrooms for the 5.4, so we're going to do that one too.
We'll be covering topic 5.3, which is the Green Revolution. So the Green Revolution refers to a sweeping set of changes in agricultural production methods that occurred in the late 1950s and 1960s. It brought widespread use of something called high-yield varieties, as well as chemical pesticides, fertilizers, and industrial irrigation systems for watering crops. It was somewhat of a global effort to help prevent starvation that was far more common prior to these agricultural improvements. So some of the major US players were the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations, but at the center of the movement was an American agronomist named Norman Borlaug, who was actually awarded the Nobel Prize in 1970 and is credited with saving over 1 billion lives with his high-yield wheat varieties. These high-yield crops produced more food than ever before and improved the supplies and economies of Mexico, Pakistan, India, and many other nations all over the world. So this might seem like a really happy story and a wonderful thing, and in many senses it is. It saved the lives of tons and tons of people, but we also need to explore the environmental consequences of the Green Revolution, and that's what today's video will be about. Our objective today is to describe changes in agricultural practices, and in order to do that, the essential knowledge that we need is that the Green Revolution was a shift in agricultural practices in order to increase food production. But we need to know that it had both positive and negative results. So some of the new agricultural practices it brought include increased use of machines, genetically modified organisms or GMOs, fertilization, irrigation, and pesticide use. We also need to know that mechanization of farming can increase profits, but can also increase our fossil fuel reliance. And our suggested science skill for today is text analysis, which we'll actually be practicing in class, not at the end of the video. So the Green Revolution was a shift away from small family farming practices to larger scale industrial farming practices. Remember that this brings the increased use of mechanization, GMOs, irrigation, fertilizers, and pesticides. So this had some huge advantages. It greatly increased the productivity of farms. It made our land more efficient so we could produce more food in smaller areas of land. That's going to help the global food supply, which is going to drastically reduce starvation. So because there's more food available, because these agricultural methods are so much more efficient, we actually increase Earth's carrying capacity for human beings. Now, there are some drawbacks, though. Since this is an AP environmental science class, we have to focus especially on the environmental drawbacks. So those are things like soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and contamination of ground and surface waters.
This is my tablescape. It's effortless, but still fancy. That's the vibe we want for this table.
Bring on the spring at the Honda Spring Event with a Honda Accord, one of car and drive.
Try to get two in.
Before the Green Revolution, most farm labor was done by hand or by human labor or animal labor, but mechanization is the use of machines to do agricultural labor in this case. And so these are things like tractors that can pull giant tillers that will mix up the soil, things like combines that can move through the field, as we see in the picture here, and really rapidly harvest crops like wheat. And so this is going to greatly increase farm profits, and it's going to greatly increase yields, which are the amount of crops produced per area of land. There's some drawbacks though, because these machines run on fossil fuels, primarily gasoline or diesel fuel. They produce CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and that's going to lead to global climate change speeding up. Another big disadvantage, which you can see demonstrated in the picture here, is soil erosion. So because these machines disturb the soil, and a lot of times they chop it up and mix it, that leads to soil erosion as the soil is disturbed and more easily blown away by the wind. But over time, they compact the soil. And remember, that soil that's compacted or compressed down doesn't hold water as well. So that's going to dry the soil out. And that's going to lead to it being more prone to erosion because dry soil is more easily blown away by the wind or washed away by the rain. So now we'll talk about Norman Borlaug's main contribution to the Green Revolution, which was high yield variety crops. So hybrids are crops that are crossed either between two parents of different species or between two parents of the same species but that have especially ideal traits. And so what this does is produces offspring that have a higher yield than normal. They produce more of the desired food portion of the plant than normal. So this had the really big benefit of greatly increasing the food stability of countries that adopted these high yield varieties, especially India, Pakistan, and Mexico, where Norman focused a lot of his work. So we can see him here in the field holding up some of his high yield varieties here on the right, and then on the left he's taking notes, probably recording what are the characteristics of these parent plants that I may want to cross with each other. And so that is one way to get a high yield variety. So historically, high yield varieties were always produced by hybridization, which involves saving the most productive parent plants and crossing those together, or crossing plants of slightly different species. But more recently, we've started something called genetic modification, and that's where we get GMOs. So this also produces a high yield variety offspring, but this is done by actually directly inserting a new gene into a plant's genome. It could be a gene from the same plant species or an entirely different species. So this diagram here can kind of help us understand. On the left, we have a hybrid, which is just a cross intentionally done by humans of two different parent plants to produce an offspring with the desired traits. On the right, we have a genetically modified plant where we actually insert, using laboratory techniques, a new gene into the plant. So that's going to produce an offspring with the desired trait, but this enables us to insert genes that aren't even normally a part of this species into their genome. So that brings us to the next component of the Green Revolution, which is GMOs. So using genetic modification, we can actually add to crops genes that will allow them to be drought resistant or disease resistant or pest resistant. So they may survive conditions that would have normally killed them due to these genes that give them advantageous traits. So this has the advantage of greatly increasing yield. We're going to lose fewer plants to drought, disease, or pests because they have genes that actually help them resist these shortcomings. Now that's going to increase profits as well. And we can see an example here. So we have BT corn, and BT corn is grown all over the world now, and it's genetically engineered to have the gene of a soil bacteria in the corn. And it helps the corn basically produce a protein that kills many corn pests. So the corn is producing essentially its own pesticide. Now it's safe for humans to eat. We don't have to spray as many pesticides on the corn because it's producing its own pesticides. And so this is a really impressive example of how genetic modification can increase crop yields. Now there's a drawback though. One of the drawbacks is that with genetic modification, we get totally genetically identical plants. So what we're going to have is a huge cornfield where every single plant has the same genome. That means there's not going to be genetic diversity. And that means if there's a disease or a pest that is able to impact this plant, there's going to be no chance that an advantageous trait is out there and helps some of the corn plants survive. So we are potentially making our food supply really vulnerable to pests and disease by destroying the biodiversity that used to be present in agricultural fields. Another component of the Green Revolution is the use of synthetic fertilizers. So historically, fertilizers were primarily organic, so things like animal manure or leftover plant matter from previous harvests. But with the Green Revolution, we're moving more to synthetic fertilizers. So these are man-made synthetic chemicals that have ammonium, nitrate, and phosphate in them. That's really good for plant growth because plants need these essential nutrients. It increases the yields and the profits because we're adding essential nutrients to the soil: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and plants need these to grow. So it increases their growth. One of the largest problems that this causes, though, is excessive nutrient use. And so farmers, because these fertilizers are so cheap, are oftentimes using them in abundance on their fields. And what happens when it rains really hard or when the crops are watered, a lot of those fertilizers can be washed off the agricultural fields and into nearby bodies of water, where that causes eutrophication. So we actually can see a picture of this on the screen here. We have a huge algal bloom, and that's going to cover the surface of the water. It's going to block out the sun for plants beneath the surface that rely on that sunlight for photosynthesis. And then when the algae die, they're going to be decomposed by bacteria that are going to use up a lot of the oxygen, and we could even see fish die-offs or other species that need that oxygen. Another drawback is that these fertilizers are produced using fossil fuels. So just like our increased use of mechanization, increased synthetic fertilizer use increases greenhouse gas emissions and leads to climate change occurring at a faster rate. So the next topic we'll talk about is irrigation. So advancements in irrigation allowed farmers to draw more water from underground or draw from nearby surface waters and distribute them over their crops. Now this makes agriculture possible in many regions of the world that used to be too dry or didn't receive enough rainfall. So this is going to greatly increase what we call arable land, or the total amount of land on Earth that can be used for agriculture. This is really important for regions that are prone to drought and prone to famine, which can lead to huge food shortages and mass starvation. There are some drawbacks though. So our underground water sources recharge fairly slowly, especially long-term deposits called aquifers. So they can be depleted if they're overused or if they're drawn from faster than the rainwater can recharge them. Another problem is that because water is so widely available now in many regions, farmers can actually overwater their crops, which leads to waterlogged soil, and that doesn't allow the roots to receive enough oxygen, which can stunt the plant's growth or even kill the plant. And then finally, it can cause something called soil salinization, which is where small amounts of salt that are contained in groundwater are left behind on the soil when the water evaporates, and that's going to lead to salt buildup in the soil that can eventually reach a level that's too high for plant growth. And the last advancement from the Green Revolution we'll talk about today is pesticide use. So pesticides are chemicals that are used to kill agricultural pests. These are plants or animals that damage crops, either by eating them in the case of animals, or by competing for the resources they need in the case of plants, which we tend to call weeds. So this brought on obviously increased profitability, increased yields because fewer plants are dying due to pests. But just like fertilizer, excess pesticides can wash off the crops or be leached out of the soil by increased precipitation or by irrigation, and that can carry them into nearby surface waters where they can kill non-intended target species. An especially problematic example of pesticides killing non-target species is bees. Bees are tremendously beneficial pollinators. They pollinate a lot of the crops that we grow, but many of our pesticides, since they target insects to begin with, can kill bees, unfortunately. Two prominent examples of pesticides harming a non-target species are DDT and atrazine. So DDT was a really widely used insecticide until it was discovered by Rachel Carson in the 1960s that it was causing the thinning of eggshells of eagles, which was killing their hatchlings before they were born. It also had numerous widespread impacts all over the world and was found to be just a really, really harmful pesticide that was, again, washing off of these agricultural fields and into ecosystems and really just wreaking havoc. Another example is atrazine, which is a more commonly used pesticide still today, and that can wash off of agricultural fields into nearby bodies of water, and it can cause intersex fish and amphibians. Those are fish and amphibians that develop both male and female reproductive organs and are sterile or unable to reproduce. So our suggested science skill for practice FRQ 5.3 today is to describe the author's perspective and assumptions. We'll actually be practicing text analysis in class, not at the end of this video. So instead, I want you to practice this FRQ which is describe one environmental advantage and one environmental disadvantage of using genetically modified crops. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to like this video if it was helpful, subscribe for future APES video updates, and check out other notes over here to the side. And as always, think like a mountain, write like a scholar.
Oops. All right, so we're gonna do both of these back to back.
Welcome to the next evolution of AI, built right into the Alteryx platform. Now, you can bring the power of generative AI into every step.
Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smeeds, and today we're covering topic 5.5, which is irrigation.
Whoops.
Irrigation is a
That's
super
not what
important
I
topic
had
for
down
agriculture.
there. It did say 5.4. Says that down here. So why is he saying 5.5? Let me see what happens there.
Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smeeds, and today we'll be covering topic 5.3. Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smeeds.
There we
and
go.
Today we'll be covering topic 5.4,
As
which
weird.
is the environmental impact of different agricultural practices. So we talked in the Green Revolution video 5.3 a lot about the impact that different agricultural practices brought on by the Green Revolution have. But today we'll be going into a little bit more depth, and we'll be really focusing on why and how those environmental impacts happen. Our objective for the day is to describe agricultural practices that have environmental impacts, and specifically we'll be looking at tilling, slash and burn agriculture, synthetic fertilizers, and then something called monocropping. Our suggested science skill for today is describing an environmental concept or process. So we'll start out by talking about monocropping. Monocropping is growing one species in a huge quantity in kind of an endless expanse of field, as we can see here. So this is commonly done with soy, corn, and wheat. And it's very efficient because the crop can all be harvested at the same time. It all has the same irrigation, fertilizer, and pesticide needs. So it's really efficient, and it tends to maximize profits in the short term. Now, there's a big drawback, and that's that it greatly decreases biodiversity. So this means that because you only have one species, it's especially prone to pests because the pests can just lay their eggs in the soil, and when they hatch, they have nothing but their preferred food source for as far as the eye can see, and so it makes them more prone to fall victim to pests. Another big problem is soil erosion. So because the crops are all harvested at once, that leaves the soil bare for huge stretches of the year, with no root structure in place to hold it together, with no vegetation to kind of provide a wind buffer. So with that endless expanse of bare soil, it's far more likely to be eroded by the wind and the rain. And then finally, there's really no habitat diversity for the native species that may be living in this area when we cut down forests and replace them with a monocrop field. So this is going to remove even habitats for natural predators that might act as natural pest control for the area. It's also going to decrease pollinator habitats. So we may lose vital pollinators like bees and moths because we only have one crop in the area. Now we'll talk about tilling. Tilling is the mixing up of soil, usually mechanically, in order to make it easier to plant seeds, but also make it easier for the roots to grow. So we can see a giant machine here. It's a tractor that's pulling a tilling machine behind it. This creates a problem though. It's going to loosen up the soil quite a bit. It's also going to destroy the root structure that may be left over underneath the ground. So this makes the topsoil especially prone to erosion. And we can even see that here as it's kicking up a lot of the soil particles in the air, which are blown away by the wind. This is going to, over time, lead to loss of organic matter. It's going to lead to loss of humus and loss of the key nutrients that are held in the topsoil. And so it might maximize profits in the short term from season to season, but over the long term, it's going to lead to the loss of topsoil and the vital nutrients that are needed for agriculture. And then lastly, as we can see here, a lot of these particles are going up into the air. So it's going to increase something called particulate matter, which is dust or other sediments that are in the air. This can worsen asthma and bronchitis for humans, but this can also make these particles more likely to run off into streams of water where they will increase the turbidity of the water. Remember that turbidity is the cloudiness of water or the number of total suspended particles in the water. And so that's going to be worse for fish that might need to see to catch their prey, or fish that need to breathe oxygen in through their gills. And so turbid streams are another harmful impact of tilling. If we take a look at this diagram here, we can see that on the left, when tilling is foregone, when it's not done, we're going to leave crop residue on top of the soil. Root structure is going to stay in place. So we're going to overall hold the soil in place much better. On the right, what you'll see is really hard and compacted soil after tilling is done repeatedly. And that crust that you can see there in the diagram, that top layer, is going to be really easily blown away by the wind, washed away by the rain. And so over time, we're going to lose a lot of that topsoil if it's continually tilled. Now we'll talk about slash and burn agriculture. Slash and burn agriculture is what it sounds like. It's slashing down or cutting down vegetation in order to make room for agricultural land usually, but then it's burning the leftover remains, and that's beneficial for farmers because it returns the key nutrients that are in the plants to the soil. The problem is that leads to deforestation. We're losing natural habitats that provide great reservoirs for biodiversity. Carbon dioxide is going into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide is not being sequestered or stored as much anymore because these trees are cut down. We're going to lose that air pollution filtration effect that many of these trees were performing, and we're going to actually add air pollutants to the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide contributes to global warming. That's released when we burn cut down vegetation. Carbon monoxide, which is a greenhouse gas but is also toxic to humans in high concentrations. Nitrous oxide, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. All of these are released when we cut down and burn vegetation, and they all contribute to climate change. Then we're going to have increased particulate matter in the air. So just like we talked about with the tilling, that can worsen asthma and bronchitis. We're also going to have a lower albedo, meaning that the forested area is going to reflect more light than this darkened scorched earth, which is going to absorb more light. So that's going to increase the temperature in the area. It could further dry out the area and make it harder for plants to sustain life here. And so there's just a lot of detrimental impacts that happen to an area when slash and burn agriculture is used. And lastly, we'll talk about synthetic or inorganic fertilizers. So these are fertilizers that are man-made. They contain things like ammonium and phosphates and nitrates, but they do not contribute organic matter to the soil. So that's a huge shortcoming of using synthetic fertilizers. If you were to use compost or manure, that's going to add organic matter, which remember increases water holding capacity. It acts kind of like a moisturizing layer, but it also has valuable soil microbes that will lead to better rates of decomposition, better rates of nutrient recycling. So when you add synthetic fertilizers, you may increase plant growth in the short term, but you're not replenishing the soil with the organic matter that it desperately needs.
Picture this: saving up to 10% when you bundle your home and auto insurance with
needs. Another problem is that when soil is added in this synthetic or chemical form, it's really easily leached out of the soil. So we can see here in the diagram, you have nitrogen application, and it starts out as NH4, which is ammonium, and then that's going to turn into nitrite in the soil, and then eventually nitrate, NO3, which is really easily leached out of the soil. So rain comes in, as we can see in this zoomed in diagram here, and it kind of washes that nitrate. Either it can leach it, carry it down into the groundwater, or it can leave the soil as runoff. And what we'll see here is that that can cause eutrophication. So when excess fertilizer is added to the field and it rains hard, it's washed off the field into nearby bodies of water. And because fertilizer has nitrates, which is needed for plant growth, that causes this algae bloom. The algae bloom blocks the sunlight, so plants below the surface die. The algae themselves die. And then when they get broken down by bacteria, it uses up a lot of the oxygen in the water. So eventually the fish die. We can see that in the diagram. They're not getting enough oxygen, so they suffocate. And so this is the process of eutrophication, and it's really worsened by synthetic fertilizer. One thing I want to point out is that organic fertilizer can still cause eutrophication, but usually it doesn't cause eutrophication nearly as quickly or easily because the nutrients that are in compost or in manure are released far more slowly. So a lot of that organic matter still has yet to break down. And as the microbes and the decomposers in the soil do that, they release the nutrients slowly. That is kind of the key between synthetic fertilizers and organic. Organic fertilizers release the nutrients very slowly over time, gradually, so the plants can take them up and use them. But synthetic fertilizers dump far more nutrients than are needed into the soil. And so oftentimes they leach out of the soil, contaminating groundwater or causing eutrophication. So that's a really important distinction to make between organic fertilizers, which again are manure and compost, and inorganic fertilizers, which are synthetic human-produced chemicals. Our practice FRQ for topic 5.4 today is to explain one disadvantage of using inorganic commercial fertilizers. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today.
All right.
Don't forget to like this.
We will look at those FRQs on Friday. so with the few minutes that are left, you can. It times me out so quickly. And again, I apologize for skipping. All right, so again, I think this one, there is one that doesn't have, it's not these two. All right, so these have been assigned. Oh, this is the one. Okay. So 3 and 4 are assigned already. And we'll get to 5 next week. There's one of them that does not have any. Oh, pesticides does not have any questions with it. Pesticides, so that one, when we get to that, we'll just watch that video and move on. No questions that go with that. And I think I've already assigned 11 as well. Okay. All right, so next time we meet, I'll have those two FRQs in queue, and then we'll look at irrigation methods. So there's like 10 minutes left to class, so work on your. Oh, some of you didn't do your discussion. A lot of you did. Thank you so much for doing that. I'll be checking on that in a minute. But if you haven't, so do your discussion first from the gallery walk, and then you can do the AP classroom if you're finished with that. Thank you much. And again, you all did great projects, and I hope you, as you go through the gallery walk, you find them as interesting as I did. And this is your community, so be alert to what's going on in your neighborhood, your part of the world. I'm just gonna stop sharing so I can do attendance. So again, 5.3 and 4 AP classroom, and finish your discussion. Those are what you need to do. Make sure you're up. Attendance. Damien, that's the strangest screen I've ever seen.
everybody. It's Mr. Speeds. Today we're covering topic.
Oh.